Welcome, everyone, to the Top 10 Project live. This is a little bit different from the first episode where I'm doing it live without all the editing, because I want to do it more often and I want to be able to get to these top 10s and watch more movies, basically. So, the premise of this show is that for each episode, I pick a year. In this case, we're doing 1999. I'm going to be revealing my top 10 movies of 1999. But part of the format is that before I make my top 10 or update my top 10, is I watch 5 movies from the year that I have not seen before. And then we'll see if any of those can shake my top 10 up, change things around. So, yeah, we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about it. I'll interact with chat a little bit more towards the end, but I'm going to sort of stick to the show and go through the various things. So, we'll start off, obviously, with talking about, or at least I'll tell you what the 5 movies were I watched for 1999. So let me get over to this screen. This is the first time I'm doing all this live, and I've got something. Here we go. Right, here we go. So the first movie I watched from 1999 was Go, which is directed by Doug Liman, and it's interconnected anthology movie with mostly young characters. One story's about people trying to sell and buy drugs to make some quick money. One's about a bachelor party going awry in Vegas, and then there's kind of a weird undercover police thing in the third story, and it's got a lot of kind of zany late 90s humor. It's definitely inspired by things like Pulp Fiction. It's going for that kind of thing. But this was the first one I watched for 1999. Next up, I watched Arlington Road, which is directed by Mark Pellington, and this is a dark thriller where Jeff Bridges believes his neighbor Tim Robbins, over the course of the movie, might be some kind of terrorist. It's a really interesting watch just from the perspective that this came out just 2 years before 9/11, and all the things they're talking about and just kind of how weird and timely it is. But that's the idea of it. It's got a surprising ending, I'll say. The ending definitely sticks with you regardless of anything else. But obviously those are pretty known cast members. Next up, I watched The Stray Story, which is a David Lynch film from 1999, and it's a true story about a man who wasn't allowed to drive anymore legally because his eyesight was too bad. So he decided that he didn't need a license for his tractor, and therefore rides his little his little lawnmower, I should say, and he just rides that across multiple states to go and visit his brother because he's old, he's sick, he thinks he's going to be dead in the relative near future, and he wants to try and make amends with his brother before he dies. And the movie's about that journey, and so it's the weirdest little road movie ever. But I will say, it being David Lynch does not mean that it's a David Lynch movie, because it doesn't feel like one. It's not got any of David Lynch's signature atmosphere or themes. Is a very, very, pardon the pun, it's a very, very straight film. It's just a straightforward movie. But yeah, that's The Straight Story. Next up, I watched Being John Malkovich, which I think is easily the most well-known film out of these first-time watches for me. I'd never seen it, so it was interesting. I was aware of the premise, which is that John Cusack's character discovers a portal in his work that if you go through it, you will be inside the mind and control the body of John Malkovich for about 15 minutes. And the plot goes on wild places from there. This is directed by Spike Jonze, and it's kind of a satirical comedy, I guess we'll call it, for lack of a better term. So that's Being John Malkovich. And then finally, I watched Ghost Dog: Way of the Samurai, which is directed by Jim Jarmusch. And this is one I'd heard about a long time ago. Forrest Whitaker plays this kind of assassin type character, but he lives by the honor of the samurai. He's got a book called The Way of the Samurai, and he really attaches himself and tries to live to the values of that culture. Interesting sort of indie movie with a couple of action scenes because the plot kind of lends itself to it, but it's not what you expect from a Jim Jarmusch film in terms of having that kind of thing. It feels like a Jim Jarmusch film in every other way, but certainly verging into a slightly different genre for him. So those were the 5 movies that I watched for the first time for the top 10 project, and we'll see how they did. Obviously, I did 1976 before, and at the end of the show, when I've got all my ratings in my order, we'll compare the overall scores. I'll explain that again when we get there, like how the scoring system works. But without further ado, it is time to just get into what the top 10 it is. So yeah, we'll get into it. My number 10 from 1999 is The Green Mile. So this is Frank Darabont directed, based on a Stephen King story, which, much like Shawshank Redemption, is prison themed, but it's very different in this case. It's about this very tall, gentle giant who is brought in for the murder of 2 girls. But the story very much is about the prison guards on the Green Mile, which is where the death row inmates are staying until they're going to be killed. Them befriending and sort of slowly learning and understanding who this big man is, and that he may in fact have some kind of special ability, that he's actually kind of a miracle of a person. It's got a very memorable villainous role by Sam Rockwell in there as well, kind of early on in his career. It's very good. It's very heartwarming. It's very sad in places. It's kind of this 3-hour odyssey of a sweet story, where you're kind of sad that bad things are going to happen to good people. It does feel very different to Shawshank, even though it has a lot of connective tissue, because you've got the same director, the same author that the source material is based on. But it's a very heartwarming film in a very specific way that I don't find many other types of director can capture. And it is very interesting to me that most of Stephen King's best adaptations are his non-horror work, but for some reason they seem to translate better. And I don't know if it's because like the horror stuff has to have so much mystery that's how he always ends up like kind of ruining the endings, and maybe the stuff that isn't like that is allowed to have a more just fitting conclusion. Perhaps maybe it's something like that. I mean, I know Shawshank was actually a very like a short story that was expanded into the movie. I'm not sure how big a story Green Mile was. I'm not sure how much the movie embellished it. I do wonder if Frank Darabont and whoever else was maybe working on the script, did a good job adapting it and maybe did change some things. Famously later on when he did The Mist, another Stephen King adaptation, they came up with the ending for the movie, and it's one of the most memorable things about the whole film. And Stephen King, I think, said he loved the new ending, but it wasn't something that was in the book. But yeah, Green Mile, the performances from Tom Hanks, Michael Clarke Duncan, Sam Rockwell, David Morse, I think the other guy's name is. Like, it's this kind of thing where like you're in this really horrible setting, but you end up really liking a lot of the characters and really want to root for them. And it's very memorable because of that. And it's a period piece. It's set back in it must be like the 30s or 40s, because there's like a bookend device in the movie where one of the characters is an old man at an old folks home in present day. So there's a bit of a device like that. So it has to be kind of around that era, just for the ages to line up. But it's very good. It sticks with you. It's not as good as Shawshank. I think most people would say that Shawshank is the better film, but it is a very touching film. It's got a lot of sentiment in it, and sometimes I can find overly sentimental films to not work for me, but this one I think just handles it with the right deft touch that I never find myself feeling like it's overbearing. It always like I feel the magic a little bit in a way that most films that try to be sentimental don't capture for me. So that's The Green Mile. Number 9 is Ghost Dog: Way of the Samurai. That's right, one of the new watches has made it here. This is just kind of a really interesting little like film. It's very low budget. You can tell that as you're watching it. There's not a lot of big locations or anything like that, but it's just this idea of an assassin who's following the way of the samurai. And the movie has a lot of little interludes where he's reading from the book, but it's this idea that he's loyal to a fault to this man that he feels he owes his life to, and he refers to him as his master in the same way that a samurai would refer to his master. And he is an assassin. He kills people for this effectively a gangster. But ultimately, because he witnesses something that a lot of other gangsters don't want anyone to know, they want him to be taken out of the picture, and it kind of, it puts him against this entire world. But it's a super fascinating, like, just this idea that this guy is effectively this orphan who doesn't have anything, latches onto this other culture from the opposite side of the world, and tries to live by their rule. There's this little thing that he does in the performance, Whitaker, where he uses guns. He's an assassin who's he does have a katana, I think, at one point, but he's mostly using guns. And whenever he puts his gun back in his holster, he kind of like goes like that with his hand, as if he's spinning the katana around, but he's actually just spinning the gun around. And it's just little things like that where he's so dedicated to being that. And I think Jim Jarmusch's direction and his like style of like pacing is really important, because it is, it's got a lot of those quiet in between moments that you expect from like an indie movie. And Jim Jarmusch is definitely someone who employs that. And it's really interesting seeing that style in a movie that's effectively like a gangster action revenge story, but is mostly still just this indie drama with like a slight tinge of comedy to it. It's a really weird mix, which is I think why it felt so interesting to actually watch and see how those styles kind of came together. So that's Ghost Dog Way of the Samurai. So next up, number 8 is the Blair Witch Project. This is one I flipped on. From when I first saw it as a kid, I really didn't like it that much. It just didn't click for me at all. And what's weird is that I've become really, really sick of most found footage over the last few years. I say the last few, probably the last decade at this point. But the Blair Witch Project, when I watched it again a few years ago, I was very, very pleasantly surprised at how much I appreciated it. Watching it again, and I don't know if it's just because there's so many bad found footage movies that you can really appreciate how well this did it, or just how the real down to earth, low budget, this could be real footage tone they were going for really does lend itself to basically turning a lot of moments where it's nothing into real creepy. It's just simple things like them thinking they hear a noise, or just standing somewhere, and like it's the most bare bones. We have nothing to work with, but somehow we're going to turn it into a story. And maybe part of the problem is that once they've done it, no one else can use the same trick, so it just feels like you're doing Blair Witch Project tropes. But it's really effective. They're just the simple ideas of being lost in the forest and not being able to get out. That there's some supernatural force that we can't comprehend, we can't battle. There's no big CG ghost. There's nothing like that. It's the creepiness. It's the ideas of it. And I think the actors not sounding like actors and sounding more like just people really does help it. It's one of those things where its greatest benefit is how much of not a movie it feels like when you're actually watching it. Even though that's what it is. It's part of movie making. It's a film, and that's what's so good about it. It's the tricks that you can employ. So. Yeah, Blair Witch Project, my number 8. Number 7 is Eyes Wide Shut. Now, this doesn't tend to rank like amazingly high on Stanley Kubrick lists. When Stanley Kubrick is being talked about, you talk a lot about 2001, Clockwork Orange, The Shining, all the things you'd expect to come up. This is one that, the plot of Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman, she reveals there's been some infidelity, and Tom Cruise kind of like basically goes out kind of hoping to like just have sex with someone just to get revenge in some way and whatever. Like that's, I mean, it's a solid story, right? But what really makes it all work for me is Kubrick's direction. It's the wonderful locations. Like, when Tom Cruise, it's easy to sort of like, be a kind of immature about him walking through an orgy. But when you're watching that scene of him walking through an orgy, it does feel a lot like in 2001 when you're going through the Eye of Jupiter. You feel like you're going through a biblical experience, witnessing this type of just raw sexual energy around you. And do you feel comfortable there? Does Tom Cruise's character feel comfortable there? Like, you just constantly feel this, and it really, it's about passion, it's about eroticism, but it's also about forgiveness, it's about revenge, it's about guilt, it's about all these things, and all of it wraps up really wonderfully. But Kubrick's movies always look phenomenal, and it helps this so much. And you feel just like you're with this character walking around the city, going to these various locations, and you're just along for that ride. And again, just feeling like you're there with him is just the biggest like thing I can say about it. So yeah, my number 7 is Eyes Wide Shut. My number 6 is Man in the Moon. I guess technically this is one that I also kind of flipped on, if only in the sense that when I saw this when I was young, I was too young to even really kind of get it. I watched this expecting a Jim Carrey comedy when I was like 10, and obviously it's not that. But watching it a little bit older, and you can respect it as the story of this really, memorable person. It's a biopic about a character. I say a character, but a man who loved to play tricks on people. He loved to joke. He loved to, to use a wrestling term, everything was a work. Everything was a work for the joke, for the point. And Andy Kaufman is such a unique figure. I think Jim Carrey does give a good performance. Jim Carrey is very good when he's not just doing the typical Jim Carrey comedy shtick, when he's not just playing some version of Ace Ventura. And this is a year after Truman Show, which also showed that as well. But yeah, I think this is wonderful stuff. I think it was Paul Giamatti's in there. Jerry the King Lawler of all people's in there, actually playing himself, because that was a thing, as does a lot of the cast of Taxi, except Danny DeVito, because Danny DeVito's in it as another character, so they kind of got around it with him just not showing up in the taxi bit. But they really go through kind of like what made him a weird and wonderful and special kind of person that everyone does remember fondly, and has fun with conspiracy theories about his life. It's one of those things where like it basically taught me about a person that I didn't really know. I'd maybe seen a couple of random episodes of Taxi late one night, like on one of the cable channels, and I think I knew the REM song "Man in the Moon," which this movie, I think is just named after. I don't think REM took that from something that this movie's also named after. I could be wrong, but yeah, and obviously that song's in there. They also have a new song in there. It does have a very good soundtrack. But this is one of these movies that you're really paying attention to the performances and all that. Yeah, Milos Forman is the director on this one. So it is funny actually. I think that's the weird thing about it, is that when I was a kid watching this, expecting a Jim Carrey comedy and being disappointed because I didn't think it was funny, the irony of that is that when I watch it as an adult, I do actually think it's very funny. It's just a very different type of humor to those other things. It's the ironic cuts to revealing that Andy was up to something, or what the truth of the scene was, or whatever it may be. But all those are actually genuinely quite funny in the film itself. So that is Man on the Moon, my number 6. Number 5, changing to a very different film, we have Audition. Takashi Miike's horror film that is a slow burn, that challenges gender roles. And watching this again a couple of years ago for the first time in a while, because I remembered liking it and I remembered thinking it was creepy, and everything that you remember about the last like half hour or so, all the pure horror stuff. But watching it again in sort of like a post Me Too world, and the movie starts with this movie producer having fake auditions for an actress for a movie that doesn't really exist, just so he can interview them to try and like find a wife, is a very interesting thing to look at now, when you're thinking about it through that lens. And It very much is like, the tables are flipped because it's clear from the poster. I won't spoil anything, but it's very clear from the poster that the woman that he ultimately tries to pursue might be dangerous. The poster's very indicative of that. She's holding a syringe with gloves and she's looking all kind of creepy. So that flip and the way that kind of flips, changes that around. It's kind of like something like Under the Skin with Scarlett Johansson, or anything where it's kind of I don't want to say femme fatale because that conjures up more of a noir kind of mindset, but that idea of someone getting some level of comeuppance for the type of thing they've been doing, especially in this case where it's like, it's a very kind of real world thing, and then the retaliation is so extreme and horrific that it doesn't feel like a real world thing, just like heightens it. But yeah, very, very well done. This is one that's went up for me. Like, I always liked this one, but it's one that's went up for me again as I've seen it more with more grown up eyes. I mean, I was never a kid when I saw this. I was definitely already old enough, but you still mature. As you're getting older, you still see things with new light and whatnot. Very, very good stuff. Next up, number 4 is The Iron Giant. This is a special film. I can be a little fussy with animated movies, but this one, directed by Brad Bird, it's got a lot of Superman DNA in it, and the ideals of Superman and the messaging of that, the idea of this alien robot being different, about choosing who he wants to be, the friendship with the kid, and basically the idea that everyone's going to just see him as a threat when that might not be what he is. It's very heartfelt, of course, but it has a lot of really good themes about accepting strangers and giving people a chance, giving things a chance in this case, but obviously it represents people. This always does. That stuff is really cool, and it looks good. It's a very traditional 2D animated film, which is something, we're kind of at the tail end of the era where that was still happening enough. Obviously, once you go another decade forward, you're in basically almost entirely CG land. And, obviously there was some CG movies already out at this point, but like the transition to everything animated being CG was not too long after this, really. So it does, and it feels fitting that it is, because it does have, I mean, even this poster that's on the screen just now has a very sort of retro look to it, and the movie is set, I believe, in the 50s, which kind of ties into the whole idea of like paranoia from the Cold War, and like tying that to the fear of aliens and outsiders coming in. Like all of that is all married together really perfectly. So that sort of thematically comes in as well. But it has some really touching moments and really good sort of like fist pumping moments where characters make the right choice. You're rooting for them. You want them to succeed. And of course, there's this slimy villain guy from the government who just wants to find the robot and imprison and experiment on him and all the other things. All very good stuff. Iron Giant, I think there'll be very few of my top 10s where an animated film makes the 10. This is one where there was no question. I mean, it's even in the top 5. It's that special to me. So that's number 4. Number 3 is The Sixth Sense, which, it's easy to give shit to M. Night Shyamalan for a lot of his career, after his first few movies. But The Sixth Sense was this huge phenomenon. It kind of captured the world. It came out of nowhere. He was instantly kind of a star director because of it. It helps having someone like Bruce Willis in there, of course. You've got an established actor to anchor the whole thing. But yeah, it's known for its twist, and it's a great twist. But it's also very effective in its direction. And the one thing that I think Shyamalan has never lost, even in some of his really bad movies, is that he does feel like he's always trying to do interesting things with how he shoots the movie, with how he pieces the footage together, with the style that he's employing. And I think even this one, his first feature-length movie, he's got such a strong visual style. There's a color palette, there's a color language even. Red's a very significant color in the movie whenever it pops up. You've got this story of a child psychologist trying to find redemption because he's failed someone else by helping this kid who can see dead people. And, you got a lot of creepy, almost horror movie style ghost moments. I wouldn't really call it a horror movie, though, even though it obviously is veering into horror at times. But it's very touching, and the ending is phenomenal. And it's phenomenal not just because it has a twist. Like, the twist is great, but even like the emotional impact of what follows because of the twist is really good. And like anything with a good swerve, the rest of the film is better when you watch it again, knowing, because everything fits and clicks and all makes sense. So yeah, and Haley Joel Osment was good in the movie too. And kids are usually awful, so that's that's worth something. So that is number 3. Number 2 is Galaxy Quest. Galaxy Quest I've always loved. It has slowly climbed up this top 10 effectively over the years, because the more I have seen it, the more I've appreciated it. And even something as simple as watching a lot of Star Trek and getting a lot of the humor that it's actually, it was funny on its own, but actually knowing Star Trek and seeing a lot of that makes it even better. It's basically perfect. It's about as perfect pretty much as a comedy can get, which is very impressive given that it had a troubled journey to the screen and it got edited down from an R rating. And there's one moment where it's really obvious, but I still want to say the phrase "you would never know." And not because there's no signs of it, because there's the clue at the moment where Sigourney Weaver drops an F-bomb that's been kind of switched to a more family-friendly word. Although, funnily enough, you can get away with one F-bomb in a PG-13 these days. Maybe that wasn't true at the time. But I think as far as the quality of the movie as a whole goes, you would never know. Because typically when you think of things that are like cut up to try and get a family-friendly rating, when they were supposed to not have that, they tend to feel quite messy. They tend to feel like, all the good stuff's cut out. And when I watched Galaxy Quest, I don't feel any of that at all. Like, it's still so funny. The point of it gets across. And not only is it really fun in making fun of a lot of tropes from TV and specifically Star Trek and science fiction, but it's also a love letter to fandom and like what, like the not the toxic side of fandom, but the positive side of fandom, and what something like Star Trek can mean to certain people who need something like that in their lives, and how their passion for it's a good, healthy thing. It is a love letter to love of science fiction. That is endearing to me for a start, but then it's also really funny, and has an all-star cast. I mentioned Sam Rockwell earlier; he's in this as well. Sigourney Weaver, Alan Rickman, Tony Shalhoub. You got the dad from Veronica Mars in there as one of the aliens. Rainn Wilson's got a small role. I've not mentioned Tim Allen. Tim Allen's actually good in this. He's perfect for this role. He fits it perfectly. Tim Allen's a bit of a douche in real life, though, so I don't want to compliment him too much. But yeah, Galaxy Quest is basically just about as perfect as a comedy can be. And I think I like a comedy that has just a little bit more of a purpose on top of it. And when I say purpose, all I just mean is like something outside of just making you laugh. And in this case, it's the love letter of the fandom itself. I think that just gives it so much more depth to me. So there you go. My number 1, and you're getting no points for guessing what number 1 is. My number 1 movie in 1999 is The Matrix, which I'm sure is shocking to everyone. The Matrix is a groundbreaking film. It is a phenomenal action science fiction film. It's deep with themes. It's got a lot of, allegory style elements. It's got the idea of like the artificial intelligence running amok, which is kind of relevant the more we go into the future. It's got individuality being its key theme as well, with Neo sort of like discovering who he really is and like being able to stand tall because of it. And it's got all this like action scenes. It's got the cool visual style. It's exceptionally paced. It constantly reveals the more things in the story as it's going. Everything propels into the next thing, which is why I think it's absurd that the sequels are as bad as they are, given that it's the same team of the Wachowskis. But that is not to discredit the first film, because The Matrix is phenomenal. Keanu Reeves, obviously, he was known for Bill and Ted and Speed before this, basically, and now he's known I mean, you could argue that he's known more for John Wick now than he is The Matrix, but I think they're pretty equal ultimately. But the Matrix, I think, almost needs no explanation for me as to why it is number one. It is a wonderful, wonderful film. And obviously, I love science fiction, and this was a genuinely fresh science fiction film when it came out. And much like some of the other films we've talked about, it has messages, it has a point, it has subtext, and I can only, compliment that. So, that is The Matrix. So I've revealed my top 10. We will get to what my scores for each of those movies are and my overall score for the year and see how it stacks up with my previous year. We'll do that in a bit. But before we do that, I will reveal the top 10 as voted for by you guys. And if you didn't submit, no worries, but make sure if you want to get involved, you can do it for the next episode. I'll reveal what the next year is going to be at the end. But yeah, we're going to get into this. Now, I don't have individual images for this one. I'm just going to reveal this as we go. And then I'll show you the full list at the end. But the top 10 as voted for by the audience, number 10, and by the way, this is much more different to my list than the 1976 one. The 1976 one and mine were pretty close, maybe slightly different orders, but it was mostly the same movies. This one is a little different. So number 10 is voted for by you guys is Toy Story 2. Number 9 is The Green Mile, which is actually very close to where I had it. I had that number 10. Number 8 is The Talented Mr. Ripley, which I've never seen. I did consider it as one of my 5 watches, but I did not pick it. That's something for the future. Number 7 is The Sixth Sense, so that's a bit lower here. Number 6 is The Blair Witch Project, which is close enough to where I had it. Number 5 is Being John Malkovich. So I watched that, but did not think it was good enough for my top 10. Number 4 is Election, which I have seen, but that didn't do much for me. Number 3 is Fight Club, which is probably the controversial one that I didn't have. I'm just going to be frank with you. I don't like Fight Club that much. It had never had a chance of being in my top 10, and I actually rewatched it just to confirm I still felt that way. So yeah, but Fight Club's number 3 on the audience vote for one. Number 2 is Magnolia, which I also didn't have. Paul Thomas Anderson does have a fan base who are very adamant about his work. I've only seen a couple of his films, and I've seen Magnolia. Maybe if I was in the right mood, it would have worked for me better. I remember just thinking it was very long and not really feeling what it was doing at the time. But yeah, so number 2, the fan vote was Magnolia, and number 1 is voted for you guys, and this is where we do line up because number 1 is The Matrix. I think that's something that most people are going to agree is probably the best movie of 1999. So yeah, top 10 vote. There's the results on the screen there. All 10 of the fan voted picks. So there you go. So what I'll do now is we'll bring up my top 10 with my ratings of all the films. So you can see on the screen there that Matrix gets a 9.5 from me. These are all out of 10, of course. Galaxy Quest through Iron Giant are all got 9s. Audition's an 8.5, and then the bottom half of the list are all 8 out of 10s. So that is my scores. Now, the way the scoring system works for me making a score for the year is that I take an average of all those scores, and then if there's any 10 out of 10s, that adds 3 points to the score, and if there's any 9 or 9.5s, that adds 1 point to the score. So there's 4 movies with a 9 or a 9.5. That means it's the average plus 4 in this case, which gives us a 12.5, I believe. And as you can see, that puts it underneath our previous episode, which was 1976 at a staggering 15.7. So I would say 1999 is a pretty solid year, and there's definitely a few things that just missed out in my top 10. Toy Story 2, which came up in the vote, was definitely one of them. I like Toy Story 2, it just didn't quite make the cut. What else? I enjoyed The Mummy from 1999. I think American Beauty is a good movie. It's kind of a weird one now with Kevin Spacey's whole thing. So, it is what it is. And yeah, I suppose the other thing to analyze here is that only one of my 5 watches made it onto my top 10, which I don't think's that bad. I think there's going to be episodes of this show where none of my 5 make it on the top 10. But, the 1976 one, like 3 of them did, which was very good. But Go, I didn't really like very much. I kind of kept that to myself at the start here. But Arlington Road, I thought had an interesting ending, but I thought it was a bit cheesy in places and a bit over the top. Straight Story, I appreciated for what it was, but it definitely wasn't what I was looking for in a David Lynch movie. It's definitely a very slow burn kind of drama. And Being John Malkovich, I appreciated, but it was a bit zany, maybe for my tastes. So, Ghost Dog was the one. So, yeah, that is that. 1999 is now the lowest ranking year, but there's only 2, so that's not really saying that much yet. However, next time, in about a month, we'll be looking at the top 10 movies of 1984. We're going to these. And then I guess we'll do one from the 2000s after, just to keep things spread around. So, 1984 is the next year. And I don't have the link to vote to send in the audience top 10s yet, but don't worry, when the video sort of like placeholder goes up saying that the show's going to be in about a week, the link will be in there. I'll share it on the Discord, and I'll share it on a bunch of other stuff. But that is the plan. 1984. So that'll pretty much do the show. I will chat a little to chat here just to wrap up. But I will just say in the meantime, thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully you enjoyed my top 10. Maybe got a couple of recommendations out of it. And of course, I can always revisit years in the future. There's definitely a lot more 1999 movies that I have not seen. One of the movies that I almost watched was All About My Mother, which I've not seen. So I'll have to get to that at some point. There's always going to be more movies to get to. It's just how it works. So, yeah, 1984 is next. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get more bonuses and more goodies. But that'll do for the top 10 project. Thank you for watching. But I guess we'll call this bonus time so people in chat can talk to me a bit. Hey guys, what's up? You need me to watch Beau Travail on the Criterion Show? I don't think I know that movie. What is it? I thought when I saw Man in the Moon, Peter meant the Man in the Moon Reese Witherspoon movie when she was a little kid. I definitely did not mean that. I can assure you of that much. I can assure you of that. Let me go back to this one since we're kind of done. I won't be sticking around for too long. I don't want there to be a big tail end at the end of this. But if there's any thoughts or comments on the top 10 or the results, or if there's anything I snubbed that you're mad about, by all means, let me know. Oh, it's a 1990 movie. It's a 1999 movie that made your top 10. Okay. Which I'm sure I saw when you submitted it, but I took those in a long time ago. I don't really remember. Yes. Yeah, Man in the Moon's a very interesting, kind of heartfelt movie about a person. It's kind of, it's the polar opposite of an Oppenheimer, I guess. Which is a very intense, the fate of the world's at stake the entire time kind of movie. Very different. How is Phantom Menace not on your list? Now, I've not said that I'm going to do the worst movies of any given year. But that might pop up on that list. What is my worst movie of 1999? I'm curious now that we've raised this question. Let's find out. Believe it or not, I have a document. I can check this. 1999. Apparently, I have the 1999 version of The Haunting down as my worst movie of 1999. Admittedly, if I rewatched all these movies at the bottom, I'd probably end up changing the order, but yeah, you've got that, you've got Wild Wild West, Wing Commander, you got Just Bigelow, Male Gigolo. There's a bunch of crap. How dare you? That movie is great. Oh, I didn't realize we had a woman of such culture in the chat. Yeah, yeah. Oh, Wishmaster 2 is 1999. Nah, Wishmaster 1 was better. And 4 was the crazy one. That was fun because it was crazy. Yeah. To be honest, Phantom Menace isn't even in my bottom 10. But there's enough just really crappy, like, bland things that they kind of beat it. 10 things I hate about you should be on the list. That's kind of in the middle of the pack on my overall list. Oh yeah, so there was a few things. Yeah, so the snubs that I just sort of missed out. I mentioned Toy Story 2, and I mentioned maybe The Mummy, for example, just sort of like missing out. Now that I'm looking at my entire list, I can tell you that Mystery Men, was kind of close but didn't quite make it. I can tell you that Deep Blue Sea I have a lot of fun with. It probably doesn't belong in a top 10 of the year, but I do like it a lot. Virgin Suicides I remember being quite good, although it has been a while since I watched it. So. Election wasn't on my list, Elsa. That was on the fan vote list. That was not in my top 10. Election for me is like number 35 of the year. Not that those numbers mean a whole lot in the middle of the big list because, they were a long time ago. I don't remember specifically. The worst ranked movie I watched for this list was Inspector Gadget. It's Transformers 2 Levels of a Mess. Is it that bad? I saw when I was when it came out, but I was 10. So damn. I don't think I would think it's as bad as Transformers 2 if I watched it. I'd probably agree it's really bad, but I'm having a hard time believing it's Revenge of the Fallen levels of garbage. Yeah. I mean, I'm quite happy with the list. I was hoping that maybe one or two of the other, like 5 that I watched for the first time might have made it on there. But I ended up not really feeling them too much, except from Ghost Dog. So, it is what it is. I'll be looking for good 1984 movies potentially to watch, for the next episode. But hopefully this new format still works well enough for people and people enjoy getting the results and the comparisons. It'll be nice when we're sort of filled out a lot of the different years and we can see how they compare and what years are better than others and whatnot. For now, all we can say definitively, at least for my taste, is that 1999 is not as good as 1976. It's a good year, but it's not a great year. You were a fan of the Inspector Gadget cartoons growing up? Oh, maybe there's this is like me watching Ninja Turtles 2014. I'm just infuriated by all the awful choices they've made. Speaking of, TMNT Collector's Cut is out on Patreon just now. The next Deep Space Nine's on Patreon as well. Yeah. So, yeah. I even got the X-Files episode review out in time. I was worried I wasn't going to make it before the stream was meant to, get starting. So, but I snuck it in. I thought I may have to delay it till tomorrow, but it's up. I did all the work today. So thank you very much for joining me, guys. I am going to head, but I will see you guys on stream on Twitch soon. And for anyone watching this after the fact, thank you for watching, and check out the Patreon. And if nothing else, when the video, the what do you call it? Like when it's upcoming, when you schedule the live stream and you can click on the video and it's like the wait screen. When that goes up, the link to submit your 1984 list will be in the description. I'll also put it on the Discord, and I'll probably tweet it out on the @Screams Midnight Twitter, or the X, I should say. But thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully you guys had fun. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.